There is a very specific kind of struggle that happens inside people who avoid conflict. Most people never see it. In fact, the better someone is at hiding it, the more intense it usually becomes. Conflict-avoidant individuals are not necessarily weak. They are often highly intelligent, deeply empathetic, and exceptionally skilled at reading social situations. They can sense tension before anyone else notices it. They anticipate emotional storms long before the first cloud appears. That ability sounds like a gift. Sometimes it is. But when love enters the equation, that same gift can become a prison. Because when they meet someone ordinary, they can maintain distance. They can stay emotionally regulated. They can keep one foot near the exit. But when they meet someone significant, someone who matters deeply, the entire system changes. This is where the weird conflict begins. Part of them wants to move closer. They feel the pull, the fascination, the excitement. They imagine possibilities. They picture a future. Their nervous system recognizes importance before their conscious mind does. And that's exactly when the alarm sounds. Because to a conflict-avoidant person, attachment equals vulnerability. Vulnerability creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates the possibility of pain. The very person they want most becomes the person they fear losing most. That contradiction is exhausting. They are not deciding whether they like you. They are deciding whether they can survive caring this much. This distinction matters. When you become emotionally important, you also become emotionally dangerous, not because you are harmful, but because your opinion now carries weight. Your approval matters. Your disappointment matters. Your absence matters. And that level of influence can feel terrifying. So what happens next? They often begin running two separate programs at once. Program 1 says, move closer. Program 2 says, protect yourself. These programs operate simultaneously, which creates behavior that seems confusing from the outside. One day they are warm, open, deeply connected. The next day they are distant, distracted, impossible to read. This inconsistency is not manipulation. It is internal warfare. Their mind is trying to reconcile two competing objectives, intimacy and safety. And safety usually wins, at least temporarily. Conflict-avoidant people have often learned, consciously or unconsciously, that emotional confrontation leads to loss. Maybe they grew up in chaotic environments. Maybe disagreements were punished. Maybe vulnerability was met with rejection. Whatever the origin, the lesson was clear. Peace must be preserved at all costs. The problem is that real intimacy inevitably creates friction. No two people align perfectly. Disappointment happens, misunderstandings happen, needs collide. For most people, these moments are uncomfortable. For conflict-avoidant individuals, they can feel catastrophic. So when they care deeply, even minor relational tension can trigger disproportionate anxiety. A simple text left unanswered, a slight change in tone, a difficult conversation approaching. These moments can activate a full internal threat response. Their brain is not asking, is this uncomfortable? It is asking, am I about to lose this person? And because they care so much, the stakes feel enormous. This is why they may withdraw right when connection is deepest. It's not that they feel less. It's often because they feel too much. Distance becomes regulation. Silence becomes protection. Avoidance becomes emotional first aid. Unfortunately, the very strategy designed to preserve the relationship often threatens it. Their partner feels confused, rejected, unimportant. And now the conflict-avoidant person faces the exact thing they were trying to prevent: relational tension. This creates a vicious cycle. They withdraw to avoid conflict. The withdrawal creates conflict. The new conflict increases their urge to withdraw. Round and round it goes, but there is another layer, one even stranger. Conflict-avoidant people often fantasize about total emotional safety while simultaneously fearing what it would require. They want to be fully known, but being fully known means being fully visible. And visibility always carries risk. When you become the one, you become the mirror they cannot easily avoid. You reflect their strengths, certainly, but you also reflect their fears, insecurities, unresolved patterns that can feel profoundly destabilizing. Love does not merely comfort us, it exposes us. For conflict-avoidant individuals, exposure can feel like danger. This is why patience matters. Not endless tolerance for unhealthy behavior, not self-abandonment, but informed patience, understanding that their hesitation is often a measure of significance. The more they care, the more carefully they proceed. Trust for them is not built through grand gestures. It is built through repeated evidence, consistency, calmness, emotional predictability, the absence of unnecessary drama. Each safe interaction slowly rewires expectation. Each resolved disagreement teaches a new lesson. Conflict does not always equal abandonment. Disagreement does not always equal rejection. Closeness does not always require self-destruction. This is transformative. Eventually, the internal war begins to quiet. They learn that intimacy and safety are not opposites. They can coexist. And when a conflict-avoidant person finally feels secure enough to stop running, their loyalty is extraordinary. Because they did not arrive casually. They fought their own nervous system to get there. They crossed terrain most people never even realize exists. They chose vulnerability over protection. That choice is never small. Conflict-avoidant people often live with a quiet contradiction that few others fully understand. They deeply desire connection, closeness, and emotional intimacy, yet they are equally afraid of the disruption those very things can bring. To an outside observer, this can seem confusing. Why would someone want love, friendship, or partnership, but then pull back the moment it becomes real? The answer lies in how they experience emotional tension. For a conflict-avoidant person, harmony is not just pleasant, it feels necessary. Emotional stability often serves as a form of psychological safety. They may have learned early in life that conflict led to criticism, rejection, or chaos. As a result, their brain became highly skilled at detecting tension and even more committed to avoiding it. They can sense subtle shifts in mood, changes in tone, or signs of disappointment long before most people notice them. This heightened awareness helps them maintain peace, but it also creates constant vigilance. At the same time, they are still human. They long for understanding, affection, and acceptance just like anyone else. They want someone who sees them, values them, and chooses them. In fact, because they are often highly empathetic and emotionally perceptive, they may crave deep connection even more intensely than others. They imagine meaningful conversations, mutual trust, and the comfort of being fully known. But genuine intimacy always carries a price. The closer two people become, the greater the potential for disagreement, disappointment, and vulnerability. Connection means allowing another person to affect your emotional state. Their approval matters. Their words carry weight. Their absence can hurt. For someone who associates emotional disruption with danger, this can feel incredibly risky. This is where the internal conflict begins. One part of them wants to move closer. Another part urgently wants to maintain control. They may feel excited by growing intimacy while simultaneously becoming anxious about what it could cost them. This often leads to behaviors that appear inconsistent. They may pursue connection enthusiastically, only to withdraw when emotions deepen. They may open up one day and become distant the next. Their withdrawal is rarely about a lack of care. More often it reflects the opposite. The more important someone becomes, the more power that person has to create emotional turbulence. And turbulence is precisely what conflict-avoidant individuals work so hard to prevent. This fear can be especially intense during moments of uncertainty. A delayed text, a serious conversation, or even a perceived shift in affection can trigger their protective instincts. They may overanalyze, assume the worst, or create distance before they can be hurt. Avoidance becomes a strategy for emotional regulation. Ironically, the very behavior designed to preserve relationships can often strain them. Partners may interpret withdrawal as rejection or disinterest, creating the tension the conflict-avoidant person was trying to avoid in the first place. Healing begins when they learn that conflict does not automatically lead to loss. Healthy relationships can survive disagreements. Emotional discomfort is not always a threat. Intimacy and safety are not mutually exclusive. When conflict-avoidant people experience consistent, calm, and secure connection, their nervous system gradually adapts. They begin to understand that closeness does not have to mean chaos. Over time, they can learn to tolerate discomfort without retreating. Their fear is not of connection itself. It is of the vulnerability, uncertainty, and emotional disruption that sometimes accompany it. Yet, despite this fear, they continue to seek closeness. That persistent desire reveals something powerful. The human need for connection is often stronger than even our deepest defenses. For conflict-avoidant people, honesty is rarely the problem. In fact, many of them value truth deeply. They want authentic relationships, clear communication, and genuine emotional intimacy. They dislike superficiality and often pride themselves on being thoughtful, observant, and sincere. Yet, when honesty threatens to disturb the emotional equilibrium of a relationship, an intense internal struggle begins. They find themselves caught between two competing needs: the need to express the truth and the need to preserve peace. This conflict can be exhausting. On one hand, they know that healthy relationships require openness. Unspoken frustrations do not simply disappear, they accumulate. Boundaries must be communicated. Disappointments must be addressed. Needs must be articulated. Intellectually, they understand all of this. They may even encourage others to be direct and honest. But emotionally, the situation feels entirely different when they are the ones who must speak. For them, honesty is not just about sharing information. It is about initiating uncertainty. The moment they voice a concern, they can no longer fully control the outcome. Will the other person become defensive? Will they feel hurt? Will the relationship shift in some irreversible way? These questions often arise instantly, sometimes before they are even fully aware of them. Their mind begins running scenarios at remarkable speed. They imagine the conversation going badly. They picture awkward silence, emotional escalation, or permanent damage to the bond. Even minor disagreements can feel disproportionately threatening. To someone else, it might simply be a difficult conversation. To them, it can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. As a result, the study found that the relationship between the two variables was not significant. Many conflict-avoidant individuals become experts at delaying honesty. They soften their language, minimize their feelings, or convince themselves that the issue is not important enough to mention. Sometimes they say nothing at all. They tell themselves they are being patient, considerate, or mature. Occasionally, that is true. But often they are simply trying to avoid the emotional ripple that honesty might create. This strategy offers immediate relief. Silence preserves stability, at least temporarily. The atmosphere remains calm. No one gets upset. No confrontation occurs. On the surface, peace is maintained, but the cost is internal. Unexpressed feelings rarely disappear. They linger, quietly accumulating beneath the surface. Small frustrations can transform into resentment. Needs go unmet. Emotional distance begins to grow. The peace they protected externally often comes at the expense of peace within themselves. That is the paradox. By avoiding short-term discomfort, they often create long-term dissatisfaction. What makes this especially difficult is that conflict-avoidant people are usually highly empathetic. They are acutely aware of how their words might affect others. They can easily imagine another person's pain, embarrassment, or disappointment. This emotional sensitivity, while valuable, can sometimes become a trap. They may prioritize another person's temporary comfort over their own long-term well-being. Yet genuine peace cannot exist where honesty is absent. Peace built on silence is fragile. It depends on suppression rather than trust. True relational security comes from knowing that difficult truths can be spoken and survived. This realization is often transformative. Conflict-avoidant individuals begin to understand that honesty does not destroy healthy relationships, it strengthens them. The right people may not always enjoy hearing difficult truths, but they will respect them. They will engage, adapt, and grow. Learning this takes practice. It requires tolerating the discomfort of uncertainty. It means accepting that temporary tension is sometimes the price of authentic connection. The goal is not to choose honesty over peace or peace over honesty. The goal is to recognize that real peace is built through honesty. It is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of trust strong enough to withstand it. And once conflict-avoidant people truly understand this, they no longer have to sacrifice one for the other. Meeting. Someone special is exciting for almost everyone, but for conflict-avoidant people, it can also be deeply unsettling. The very moment they realize that someone truly matters, two powerful forces often ignite at the same time. One pulls them closer, filling them with curiosity, hope, and emotional intensity. The other pushes them away, warning them of risk, vulnerability, and potential loss. Attraction and panic arrive together, creating one of the strangest emotional experiences a person can have. Attraction is easy to understand. When they meet someone who feels different, someone who captures their attention in a way others do not, their mind lights up. They become more observant, more invested, and often more energized. They replay conversations, notice subtle details, and imagine possibilities. This person begins to occupy mental space. Their presence feels meaningful. Their approval matters. Their attention feels rewarding. For a while, this can feel exhilarating, but emotional. Significance changes the equation. The moment someone becomes important, the stakes rise dramatically. What was once enjoyable now carries consequences. Casual interaction transforms into emotional investment, and investment introduces risk. This is where panic enters. Conflict-avoidant individuals are often highly sensitive to emotional disruption. They may have learned, consciously or unconsciously, that closeness can lead to pain. Attachment can create dependency. Vulnerability can invite rejection. The deeper the connection, the greater the potential for hurt. So when they realize that someone has the power to affect them profoundly, their internal alarm system activates. Their brain does not simply register romance, it registers exposure. Suddenly, they are no longer evaluating whether they like this person. They are evaluating whether they can tolerate caring this much. That distinction is crucial because caring changes everything. A delayed response feels heavier. A shift in tone becomes noticeable. A moment of uncertainty can trigger hours of analysis. They become acutely aware that this person now has access to their emotional world. And while that access is precisely what intimacy requires, it can also feel terrifying. This creates a simultaneous push and pull. They want proximity, but proximity increases vulnerability. They seek reassurance, but too much reassurance can make them feel dependent. They desire connection, but connection threatens their sense of control. The result is often confusing behavior. They may pursue intensely one day, then become distant the next. They may seem fully invested, only to suddenly need space. This inconsistency is rarely calculated. It is the natural outcome of two opposing systems operating at once. One system is attachment, the other is self-protection. Both are trying to help, but they are pulling in opposite directions. The stronger the attraction, the stronger the protective response often becomes. This is why conflict-avoidant people can appear most hesitant precisely when their feelings are deepest. Indifference rarely causes anxiety. Importance does. Being the one means becoming emotionally consequential. Your opinions carry weight. Your absence leaves an impact. Your rejection would matter. That level of influence can feel overwhelming to someone who is accustomed to emotional self-sufficiency. Ironically, the person they want most can temporarily become the person they fear most. Not because they distrust them, but because they distrust what losing them would feel like. Over time, if the connection proves safe, the panic begins to quiet. Consistency, emotional stability, and trustworthy behavior gradually teach their nervous system that closeness does not always lead to chaos. Until then, attraction and fear may coexist. That is the strange reality of being deeply important to a conflict-avoidant person. Their hesitation is often not a lack of interest. It is evidence of just how much you matter. When someone has the power to change your emotional landscape, excitement and fear often arrive hand in hand. When a conflict-avoidant person begins to develop serious feelings, their behavior often changes in ways that can seem subtle, contradictory, or even confusing. On the surface, they may appear calm and composed, but internally, a significant shift is taking place. Emotional investment raises the stakes, and with higher stakes comes a stronger desire to protect themselves from discomfort, vulnerability, and the possibility of loss. One of the first signs is increased attentiveness. They start noticing small details about you, your routines, your preferences, the stories you casually mention. Conflict-avoidant individuals are often highly observant by nature, and when they care, that awareness intensifies. They may remember things you forgot you even said. Their interest becomes precise. This is rarely accidental, it reflects genuine emotional investment. At the same time, you may notice moments of hesitation. They might take slightly longer to respond to emotionally significant messages. They may pause before answering personal questions or carefully choose their words during important conversations. This is not indifference. It is caution. They are managing risk, weighing vulnerability against safety. Another common behavior is selective openness. They may reveal deeply personal information in small, measured doses. Rather than sharing everything at once, they test the waters. Each disclosure functions like an experiment. How will you respond? Will you judge them? Will you handle their honesty with care? Trust for them is built incrementally. As feelings deepen, they often become more consistent in practical ways. They check in regularly, offer support, and make themselves available. Their reliability can become one of the clearest indicators of attachment. They may not always express their feelings directly, but they often communicate through actions rather than declarations. Yet alongside this growing closeness, subtle withdrawal can also appear. They may occasionally become quiet after moments of intense connection. Following a vulnerable conversation or an especially meaningful interaction, they sometimes need space to regulate. Emotional intimacy can feel exhilarating, but it can also leave them feeling exposed. Temporary retreat helps them regain equilibrium. This pattern can be perplexing. One day, they seem deeply engaged, the next slightly distant. The shift is usually not about losing interest. More often, it reflects their attempt to process the significance of the connection. Conflict-avoidant individuals also tend to minimize potential disagreements. They may quickly smooth over minor tensions, change subjects, or use humor to diffuse emotional intensity. When feelings are serious, even small conflicts can feel disproportionately threatening. They often work hard to preserve harmony, sometimes at the expense of their own immediate honesty. Another subtle behavior is increased sensitivity to your reactions. They become more aware of changes in your tone, facial expressions, or communication patterns. A delayed response or a slight shift in mood may occupy more of their attention than they would openly admit. Your opinion now carries weight. They may also seek reassurance indirectly. Rather than asking, "Do you still care about me?" they might look for consistency in your actions. They observe whether your behavior matches your words. Security for them is built through patterns, not promises alone. Perhaps the most misunderstood behavior is their occasional need for distance. When emotions become intense, stepping back can feel like regaining control. This distance is often temporary and self-protective rather than rejecting. The key is understanding that seriousness amplifies both their desire for connection and their instinct for self-preservation. They move closer, then recalibrate. They open up, then assess. They care deeply, which is precisely why they sometimes proceed carefully. Their subtle behaviors are not signs of emotional absence. In many cases, they are evidence of profound emotional significance. When a conflict-avoidant person begins acting a little more cautious, they may start to avoid conflicts altogether. A little more observant and a little more vulnerable, it often means their feelings are becoming very real indeed. Emotional withdrawal is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in relationships. When someone suddenly becomes distant, quieter, or less expressive, it is easy to assume they no longer care. For conflict-avoidant individuals, however, withdrawal often means the exact opposite. In many cases, they pull away not because their feelings are fading, but because those feelings have become too intense to comfortably manage. To understand this, it helps to recognize how conflict-avoidant people experience emotional stress. They tend to be highly sensitive to interpersonal tension. Even minor disagreements, ambiguous signals, or changes in relational dynamics can feel disproportionately significant. Their nervous system often interprets emotional uncertainty as a threat, even when no actual danger exists. When they care deeply about someone, that sensitivity increases. The stakes are no longer theoretical. The relationship matters. The possibility of disappointment, rejection, or conflict becomes emotionally consequential. Suddenly, every interaction carries more weight. This can become overwhelming. Unlike people who instinctively move toward connection during stress, conflict-avoidant individuals often regulate by creating distance. Withdrawal provides space to think, calm down, and regain a sense of internal control. It functions as a psychological reset button. In their mind, stepping back is often the safest way to prevent escalation. From the outside, this can look cold or uncaring. Inside, it often feels like survival. They may retreat after an argument, following a vulnerable conversation, or even after a particularly intimate moment. This can seem paradoxical. Why withdraw when things are going well? Because positive intimacy can be just as activating as negative conflict. Deep connection requires openness, and openness creates vulnerability. Vulnerability can feel destabilizing. For conflict-avoidant individuals, emotional exposure often triggers a protective response. Their mind begins scanning for Potential risks. What if they are misunderstood? What if they become too dependent? What if they are eventually hurt? Distance temporarily reduces these anxieties. It is important to note that withdrawal is rarely an attempt to punish. More often, it is an attempt to self-regulate. They are not necessarily trying to send a message, they are trying to regain emotional balance. Ironically, this strategy can create the very problems they hope to avoid. Their partner may feel rejected, confused, or abandoned. This reaction can then generate the conflict-avoidant person was trying to prevent. That is the cruel efficiency of avoidance. It protects in the short term while often damaging connection in the long term. The deeper the feelings, the stronger the urge to protect them. When someone matters greatly, the potential for pain grows alongside the potential for joy. Emotional withdrawal becomes a way of controlling exposure to that risk. Think of it less as running away from the person and more as retreating from the intensity of their own emotions. Of course, self-protection can become unhealthy if it turns into chronic avoidance or emotional unavailability. Understanding the reason behind withdrawal does not mean accepting harmful patterns indefinitely, but recognizing its true source allows for greater compassion and more effective communication. Conflict-avoidant individuals often need reassurance that temporary discomfort will not lead to permanent damage. They need evidence that connection can survive tension. Over time, safe and consistent relationships can teach them that retreat is not always necessary. When they learn that vulnerability does not inevitably lead to chaos, withdrawal becomes less automatic. So when a conflict-avoidant person pulls back, it usually does not mean they care less. Quite often, it means they care so much that their protective instincts have taken over. Their silence is not emptiness. Their distance is not indifference. It is often the language of someone trying to manage emotions they have not yet learned to fully trust. Understanding the patterns of a conflict-avoidant person can dramatically change the course of a relationship. What once seemed confusing, inconsistent, or even hurtful begins to make sense when viewed through the right lens. Instead of interpreting distance as rejection or hesitation as disinterest, you begin to recognize these behaviors as protective strategies. That shift in perspective alone can reduce enormous amounts of unnecessary pain and misunderstanding. Most relationship problems are not caused by a lack of caring. They are caused by misinterpretation of behavior. One person withdraws to regain emotional balance, while the other experiences that withdrawal as abandonment. One avoids difficult conversations to preserve harmony, while the other interprets silence as indifference. Without understanding the underlying pattern, both people can end up reacting to fears rather than reality. Awareness interrupts that cycle. When you understand that conflict-avoidant behavior is often rooted in self-protection, you become less likely to personalize it. You stop assuming every moment of distance is a sign of fading affection. You recognize that their hesitation often reflects the significance of the connection, not the absence of it. This understanding creates emotional stability, and emotional stability is exactly what conflict-avoidant individuals need most. They are constantly assessing whether a relationship feels safe enough for full vulnerability. They pay close attention to how conflict is handled, how disappointment is expressed, and whether emotional honesty is met with criticism or compassion. Every interaction either reinforces their fear or challenges it. When you respond with consistency instead of volatility, you offer something profoundly healing. You demonstrate that disagreement does not have to become destruction. You show that. Difficult conversations can strengthen connection rather than threaten it. Trust grows in these moments, not through grand romantic gestures, but through ordinary reliability, a calm response during tension, patience during withdrawal, honesty without aggression, boundaries without punishment. These experiences gradually rewire expectations. The conflict-avoidant person begins to realize that closeness does not automatically lead to chaos. Emotional exposure becomes less threatening. Vulnerability becomes more accessible. At the same time, understanding does not mean enabling unhealthy behavior. Relationships thrive on mutual effort, not one-sided accommodation. Compassion should never require self-abandonment. Healthy understanding involves balancing empathy with clear boundaries. You can recognize their fears while still expecting accountability. You can respect their need for space while also communicating your own needs. In fact, this balance often strengthens trust even. Further, it shows that the relationship can hold both people fully. As trust deepens, conflict-avoidant individuals often become remarkably loyal and emotionally invested. Once they believe that honesty will not cost them connection, they become far more willing to share their inner world. Conversations become richer. Emotional intimacy becomes deeper. Their defensive patterns begin to soften. The relationship shifts from reactive to secure. Instead of chasing and retreating, both people learn to move toward each other. Instead of fearing conflict, they begin using it as a tool for understanding. Instead of interpreting behavior through insecurity, they interpret it through knowledge. That is the real transformation. Trust is not built by avoiding difficulty. It is built by surviving difficulty together. When conflict-avoidant individuals experience a relationship where they can be imperfect, they may find it difficult to open up and form a deep and meaningful connection with someone. Honest and emotionally exposed without losing connection, something powerful happens. Their nervous system relaxes, their walls lower, their capacity for intimacy expands, and for their partner, understanding replaces frustration. Compassion replaces confusion. In the end, the goal is not to eliminate their protective instincts overnight. The goal is to create a relationship strong enough that those instincts are no longer always necessary. That is how trust deepens. That is how patterns change. And that is how understanding transforms love into something lasting.